Apple's WWDC is upon us, and one of the big initiatives, or so says the company, is to help us break iOS addiction. And speaking of iOS addiction, it's a legacy OS by this point. We have Bill Detweiler and Larry Dignan. Larry, what is Apple going to do about this code upon code upon code amalgamation that iOS has really become?
I think it's an interesting conundrum, and it's something we've seen with other vendors too. For instance, Windows, right? And so iOS has been in the market for a long time now. It's one of the dominant mobile platforms, and as a result, you just go year after year after year adding new features onto it, tweaking, and then after a while, all that code just builds up, and it just becomes basically sludge. And I think that's what we're starting to see with iOS. Like most of the talk about iOS 11 for over the last year has been what's wrong with it, not what's right with it, right? And it's about fixes, and it's about, you know, Apple saying they're not going to do the big bang anymore. They're going to do incremental and get that right. So you can kind of see, we've seen this movie before with Windows. Android, not so much, because Android was forced to do a rewrite due to the Java, Oracle, Google lawsuit. So Apple's kind of next up, right? And then you see Apple, they're also trying to bridge iOS with the Mac OS, and you do all this stuff, and it's starting to get a little complicated. And I think that's where, you know, this is a developer conference, so while we're going to be talking digital health and AR kit and all this good stuff, I do have to wonder if the iOS platform overall just needs to get a rewrite. Right? Like, just simplify this thing, break it down to what it is. Because, you know, iOS, when it was first launched and as it kind of developed in its prime, which, you know, I'd say the prime for iOS was probably like iPhone 6-ish, right? Where it was kind of like, it was humming, right? You're like, oh, this is sweet. But now you scroll through this stuff and you just get bogged down with code sometimes. It's not as clean as it used to be, right? So, and we saw this problem with iTunes too, like, as you know, that really just became a bloated mess, and, you know, frankly, kind of still is. But you see this over time, and it's not necessarily an Apple thing. It's kind of every tech vendor has this, right? They have this code, they have this software, it becomes successful. It's always got to be reverse compatible. So then you're advancing the ball, yet you're just building more and more code, and it just gets kludgy over time. I mean, you see this in every piece of software. And ultimately, it just calls for a rewrite and a do-over. And I don't quite know when Apple's going to do that, you know, go for that. But I think, you know, whether it's this WWDC or the next one after that, there's going to be an overhaul required, just because you're just acquiring too many lines of code at some point, and it just becomes too bloated.
Bill, I know WWDC is the Worldwide Developers Conference. The focus is almost exclusively on software. But what can we expect from Apple in terms of hardware this year?
Well, you know, it's really hard to tell. There are some rumors around a refresh to the Mac Pro line, the MacBook line, but those probably aren't really going to be announced until September and probably come until next year. They got a refresh not that long ago. There's some iPad Pro rumors around. We'll see some new versions there, but, you know, again, I'm not sure about that. We might see, the one thing that we might see, because this is going to be so heavily focused on iOS, is the new iPhone SE 2. So this is the sort of lower cost iPhone, and we don't necessarily know what that's going to be. It could be an iPhone 10 style all screen front with the notch. It could be an iPhone, an iPhone 8 style SE. We'll just have to wait and see what's going on there. I mean, there's some other things that, you know, could be announced as well. Maybe some updates, not new per se, maybe some updates to Apple TV. We're thinking that TV OS might get an update. We're thinking that HomePod, you know, there's hopefully going to be some smarts, some updates to HomePod, even if not a hardware update. And then, you know, one of the things that Larry was talking on with software that I'd love to see Apple do, again, not maybe hardware related, but Siri. I really think that Apple has let Siri decline in the last few years. I can remember when around the iPhone 6 time, iPhone 7, I thought Siri was, doing a pretty good job recognizing my voice with the dictation. But I don't know what it is in the last year or so. It seems to have actually, for lack of a better term, gotten dumber or gotten worse. I don't know how that happens, if it is code bloat, but I really want to see them do something with Siri, do something with iTunes, make AirPlay easier to use. Hey, back to hardware, maybe we'll see AirPower finally come out. It's been a while since they talked about that, but it's kind of a waiting game at this point to see what Apple does.
Yeah, so IoT and, like you mentioned, the failings in Siri have been two stumbles for Apple in the last few years. And we saw at WWDC last year that machine learning was really the priority. Larry, this year, health is the priority. And as I joked a little bit at the beginning of this video, they want to allegedly help us break this addiction to iOS devices. What do you make of this?
I think it's getting ahead of an issue that's probably going to become prominent in the next few months to a year, right? So we saw Google do this at Google I/O. They have all these controls for your phone. Basically, it'll tell you you're watching YouTube too much. It'll basically tell you to pull back, get off your screen, see some daylight. And iPhone's doing the same thing. And in the grand scheme of digital health, I'm all for it. I'll probably use a lot of these things, even though I try to ignore my phone as much as possible anyway. But I view this as, I think there will come a point where the addiction thing with smartphones and social and all that becomes like an issue. So you can almost see the time where you'll have, Tim Cook, Zuckerberg, the Google executives, et cetera. You can see them almost before Congress. Well, you created these devices designed to, give a dopamine hit or whatever it is. Like, you can kind of see where this is going. Because, we're Americans. We always like to blame everybody else for, addictions. So I think this is just getting ahead of an issue because the research is starting to build up about, social media's impacts and the smartphone impact and all of that kind of stuff. So I think this is sort of a beginning of a conversation. And I think all these digital health initiatives are really so the companies like Apple and Google and, everybody in the food chain can basically say, look, we saw this, we were ahead of it, we don't need to be regulated. Right? Because you kind of see where this, I see it all the time with, I can just go to a soccer pitch and when I'm watching my kids play, there's inevitably a parent telling a kid to get off their phone. And then the parents, as 3 seconds after they say that, they're on their phone looking at Facebook or whatever it is. So it's, the time wasted and the life wasted on screens, I think it's an ongoing issue. But this is something where the companies are trying to get ahead of it. So I don't really see it as anything more than that. But I think it's pretty smart from a business perspective.
Yeah, it's an incredibly smart move, smarter than Siri at the very least. I am all about using IoT devices for health, and I love the Apple Watch, but the Siri problem and the machine learning problem will persist. Bill Detweiler, Larry Dignan. Larry, where can we go to learn more about not just WWDC, but advances that we see in IoT, machine learning, and other digital transformation trends?
You can pretty much go to ZDNet.com. We're writing about this stuff almost nonstop at this point.